Thank you very much. Welcome to the October 13th Village Board Work Session. This meeting is now called to order. We'll begin with the pledge.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. We have a pretty brief agenda, and we're starting earlier than usual, and we're on a different day than usual. But we do have a very exciting agenda. We're going to be hearing from Peter Rizzullo, who's been to the village board many times, but it's been a number of months. And in that time, he and his colleague have done some significant research and design, and we look forward to learning about that. So I'll make my announcements brief. I will remind everyone that it is an election year, and if you are not registered to vote, or if you need to update your voter registration, you have about 24 hours. Voter registration in New York State, we're one of the less progressive when it comes to that, shockingly. We not only can you not have same-day voter registration, you have to do it weeks in advance. So October 14th in person, but if you go online to the Westchester County Board of Elections, you can print up an application and do the update and just get it to them in the mail by the 19th, I believe. Yes, did you have more details
No,
on
I
that?
just want to say for those of you that have kids in college in the state of New York, to please remind them because they can go online from wherever they are.
And they can apply for an absentee ballot, and
Right.
there's still time to do that. So again, it's Westchester Board of Elections. Just do a little search and print up whatever application you need, get it in the mail. It's always an exciting year to be voting, and this one is certainly no exception. I'm sure we're all keenly aware of the November 8th date up ahead. Anybody else with announcements of exciting things going on we need to address? All right, then, village manager, interim village manager, and village engineer tonight. Take it away.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Board. We'll add to what the Mayor already started in form of an introduction for Mazer Consulting. Peter Rizzullo, who's been in front of us often, is joined tonight by Mr. Ron Riemann from his office. Just to recap for the public and those who are going to watch this meeting on TV, the intersection of Spring and Main, which was partially impacted by the conversion of Spring Street to a two-way between Main Street and Waller, rather, started necessitating. Thank you. Yes, correct. Yes, thank you. It's been a while. It was impacted by that change in traffic pattern. That's proved to be, from a traffic perspective, a success. It's really an intrinsic test to see what it's done to the business economy down there. But with regard to traffic flow and accidents and the like, I think it was a worthy effort and something that we're going to look to keep on a permanent basis because it's working well. And we've also adopted local legislation on a permanent basis to restrict the speed limits there, change the loading zones, and the one business we had a concern with is now opened and hopefully thriving, and there's been no issues that I'm aware of with regard to loading or parking or vehicular traffic incidents or pedestrian incidents that I'm aware of. So that said, and with that two-way pattern remaining in place, we started to discuss the necessity of upgrading for pedestrian and traffic conditions the intersection of Brandreth, Central, Main, and Spring. It's a five-way intersection. Everybody knows about it, and it was the source for a lot of questions over the past year with regard to the two potential rehabilitations of that intersection, those being the conventional intersection improvements, which would today take more or less the traffic pattern and intersection design as it stands today and bring it up to standard with particular pedestrian improvements and signal improvements that would essentially maintain the same aesthetic and traffic flow, but bring it up to today's standards. The second option presented to the board last year was the roundabout option. And we pursued both to a certain level. At that point, the board wanted a true apples-to-apples comparison, and we went away for a while and were working behind the scenes because there were certain things we needed to do to create that apples-to-apple comparison, including up-to-date traffic counts during high flow in school during rush hour conditions. And those have all been accomplished, and those have all been incorporated into what you're going to see tonight by Mazer Consulting. You're going to see two things. You're going to see an apples-to-apple comparison of a 30% design submittal on conventional and roundabout intersection design, and then some of the costs associated with the same, and then some of the cost benefit and functionality benefits and detractions of each design. So I'm not going to take away any more of Peter or Ron's presentation, but I'm looking forward to it because it's going to include an actual simulation too, which I think is a really a nice touch and feel component that I think we should all remind each other that those who couldn't be at the meeting tonight from the public should watch this on TV, because it's something that's going to answer a lot of questions that were thrown about in the 6 months between the last time we were in front of you all. So as constituents ask and want to know answers, I think a lot of the questions are going to be covered here tonight as you determine which improvement we are going to go forth with to a 100% design and eventual construction in the future. So thank you. I'll turn it over now to Peter and Ron from Mazer. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. It's a pleasure to be here again.
Oh, my.
We're almost there.
And how do we get this little sucker going? Oh, there we go. Yep.
Oh, and there it is.
This image I think we're all very familiar with. Again, my name is Peter Russillo. I'm with Mazer Consulting, and with me is Ron Raymond, who assisted in a lot of the simulation and capacity analyses that we conducted. This image represents what's currently in the field. It's the interim measure that we produced and designed and was installed within the last year or so. Using this as a base, we then took counts at this location this past May. Excuse me, and we did it then because, as Paul mentioned, we needed to get a period of time when schools were in session, colleges were still in session, wasn't holiday time, and we were able to go through it, count during the AM and PM peak hours, and we developed capacities, which I'll touch on a little bit later. But first, I'd just like to run through some of the geometric differences between the conventional and the roundabout alternative. This image you have seen before. What winds up happening here is that we have bump outs on the four corners. We actually pull this corner back to allow tracking for buses and trucks. We expand the sidewalk on the northwest side and on the northeast side, as well as replacing the crosswalks on the southeast corner. This plan also calls for replacement of the traffic signal. There was a discussion, I think, last time where there was a question whether we could use the old equipment. The problem is the way the poles are situated, the existing poles, and the way that the arms are oriented would place the existing signal heads on those existing arms too close to the stop bars. Your signal indications cannot be close in 40 feet to a stop bar, and ordinarily shouldn't be more than 120 feet from a stop bar. It's what they call a cone of vision. So if you're sitting at the stop bar, you have a 20-degree angle in each direction that you can view a signal head. And you have to be, again, between that 20 and that 40 and 120. If you have supplemental heads, say you have a pole-mounted head on the side, that can be within 15 feet of the stop bar. So there would be a need to replace the signal in its entirety with this system.
Just remind everybody that's viewing, when was the last time these things were all done? The lights, how
Paul, I
old is
don't know
this
that. It's
equipment? Do
probably
you know?
probably 20 years ago, I imagine, at least.
No, I think it's closer to 30 to 35
30,
years
yeah.
ago.
Yeah, I just want people
based
to
on some of
understand the
material.
age.
aging of
And I will
this.
tell you, in addition to the technical merit of not or having to have to do a signal based on the stanchions and the locations, we have very compromised underground conditions of the wires here. They've been cut and repaired at least 3 times in my tenure, and they tend to be faulty from time to time. So they're definitely in need of an upgrade if this is the route we go.
The other element of this is, of course, upgrading all the pedestrian crosswalks and pedestrian signals. The ones that exist today would not work because they would be too far from the ramps and the crosswalk. The law requires you to be within 10 feet of a push button to the actual ramp. So you're really limited with where the existing push buttons are. You'd have to redesign those as well. With this plan, there's a couple of other items that need to be addressed. There's drainage basins that have to be adjusted. Obviously, manholes and valves that would have to be adjusted. We're calling for complete replacement of the sidewalk on each of the corners right up to the building face. And then there'll be some resurfacing with the entire intersection area. This slide indicates the differential, the area that is paved that will then become sidewalk or perhaps rain garden in this area. In the northwest, you have the same condition. In the southwest corner, we're actually increasing pavement, that little blue area, by a little bit. So you can see there is a gain of area that can be used as rain garden or planters, or certainly pedestrian space. Now, I'm going to go through, there's a series of advantages and disadvantages to the conventional as well as to the roundabout, and I just wanted to give you an overview. These are the different elements that we look at when we start to compare the two, and these will be repeated for each of the different alternates. Intersection operations, by that I mean the actual functioning of the intersection, the timing considerations, how traffic moves through the intersection. Safety, of course, that is not only pedestrian safety but also vehicular safety. You have traffic calming, a means of slowing people down. Obviously, with a signal, somebody has a green light all the time. You have space. What does it do to the area? How is the area? What's the treatment that you do in the area? What are you affecting? Environmental factors. At a conventional intersection, you have stop control. Cars sit, they wait, they consume fuel. Non-motorized users, meaning pedestrian and bicyclists, how are they affected by either of these alternates? And then the operation and maintenance deals with, how do you get the snow plow through the intersection, the functionality of it for people that have to maintain either the roundabout or the signal system itself. And then access management. What do each of these alternates do to those that are that exist along each of the approaches to these systems, this intersection? The first two, in terms of the conventional intersection, you can see the right-of-way is predictable. It's something that the controller decides. The village makes up its mind how they want to have that done. You can actually fully actuate the signal, which becomes very demand responsive. You can change the timings by hour of day, day of week, week of year. You can program in holidays. And these controls are very sophisticated. They can be outfitted to give priority to emergency services by preemption devices. The disadvantage is you do have increased delays. Somebody's always going to be stopped at the intersection, and they're going to be delayed. Their queuing can be extensive at certain times. Peak hours, coming down Main Street, I'm sure going to the train station, if the timing isn't right and you don't have it set up properly, you'll have extensive queues. And those queues mean that there'll be a continuous delay. And, of course, you're going to have delay even in off-peak times because the signal, unless you put it on flash, the signal is always going to be functioning. Somebody's always going to be stopped again. So that means you have delays. Safety. Drivers are familiar with conventional intersections. It limits the movements allowed at one time, the signal does. And it can reduce the pedestrian vehicular conflicts with a dedicated pedestrian phase. That phase can in a way decrease capacity if you have a fully dedicated pedestrian phase. Most signals operate pretty much walk on the green, not in between. And you just have pedestrian indications with countdown timers, which this would have it if you have a conventional. That's the latest technology. It would give the pedestrian an opportunity to cross. That timing is geared towards a certain number of feet per second that you walk and a certain distance that you have to cross. So all this can be tailored to this particular intersection. You do have, on the other side, increased crash severity. You have right angle accidents, and you can have higher speed accidents. And you have numerous conflict points in a four-way intersection. You have 32 points where there are conflicts between turning vehicles or vehicles that proceed through the intersection. And you always have, of course, the potential for running a red light. Traffic calming. Obviously, with a signal, vehicles are forced to stop. That's about as calm as you can get. The disadvantages, we have higher speed through the intersection. Space, intersection can be developed within a limited area. In this particular case, we're actually tightening it up so that we're actually reducing the amount of pavement. The disadvantages, it can be, if you have left turn lanes, and not necessarily this case, but just a typical intersection, if you require a left and right turn lane for capacity reasons, that means there's a lot more area that you have to take up and increase your potential right of way. The environmental factors. Okay, they're simple to handle rainfall, but what I mean by that is that where you place the catch basins are very convenient. They can be out of the crosswalk areas. They're usually, depending upon what the grade is, obviously on the lower side of the intersection. And this intersection sort of slopes from the northeast to the southwest. So all of your water is going to sort of come that way and go down central and perhaps spring as well. You can develop rain gardens, grass strips, and you can improve streetscapes. The disadvantages you have environmentally, startup noise. Peak and off-peak, you have increased fuel consumption, energy utilization, and there are air quality impacts. For non-motorized users, pedestrians can be provided with the dedicated right-of-way, which I mentioned in one of the earlier sections. Bicyclists are familiar with the rules of the road, and the crosswalk locations are usually right at the corner and offer high visibility to motorists. On the other hand, pedestrians have to consider two directions of traffic if there isn't a particular dedicated indication. Pedestrian vehicle conflicts tend to be at higher speeds because traffic travels at a higher speed, and the path to cross can be long. Obviously, in this case, we're trying to minimize the length of a pedestrian has to cross. Operational, they're easy to plow, a typical intersection. Vehicle and pedestrian signal hardware, on the other hand, requires maintenance. You'll have to, push buttons always get damaged, have to be replaced. Signal lamps burn out, although with LEDs not quite as frequently as they used to. And you can get vehicles hitting the pedestrian poles, replacing ped poles. In access management, you have increased area for on-street parking because you've tightened everything up, and you provide gaps for parking maneuvers. That what I mean by that is, if a light turns from green to red on, say, Main Street, a person that's on the south side of Main Street can now have an opportunity to back into a parking space because they don't have the through traffic coming through. Yeah, they'll have some turning traffic, but it's still the through traffic that sort of inhibits the parking maneuvers. On the other hand, if you do have queues develop, those queues may block a driveway upstream or block the ability to get into or out of a parking space. And this is just a graphic of what that plan depicts and how the crosswalks are tightened up, and you have the bump out areas in the northwest and northeast corners. Moving on to the roundabout.
Can you go back to that picture, just one,
Um,
or maybe not?
yeah, no, I can.
No, there. So, that actually looks significantly different than what
Then,
it looks like now, because now it doesn't look like a five-way intersection anymore, the way that visually.
Well, I think it's
I don't know how that happened.
it's probably the oblique angle
Okay.
that the photograph is
Because-
taken at.
You can't see Central Avenue.
Well,
Central Avenue is-
There's also the
That-
stop bar where the yellow cab is there.
Yeah,
That
Yeah, what is
doesn't
that?
exist now.
right. Right.
So we're gonna see a simulation of this though, right? That'll
Oh,
make it
good.
more clear.
Yes, yeah.
Right, It's totally different.
Yeah, it is tough to imagine how this can function as a four-way intersection.
Right.
Now, again, this is the roundabout alternative, and as I mentioned last year, I get maybe earlier, early spring, the roundabout consists of a number of different elements. You have the splitter islands, you have the central island that usually is raised and landscaped. Then you have an apron that is used mostly by trucks or buses. It isn't intended for cars to track over that. These splitter islands are mountable. The crosswalks would generally go between a couple of car lengths outside of the roundabout so that a person would cross behind the two vehicles in front. They would be located here, back here, and over here. Again, we've had run turning tracks, which I think I presented some time ago, that show fire trucks and buses can maneuver in any direction through this roundabout. Similar to the conventional intersection, we have this blue area, which is currently out of the pavement, that will become within the pavement, and that goes also for this corner over here. But we do have areas in the northeast and the southwest that get reclaimed and become either landscape, part of streetscape, or concrete, brick pavers, or what have you. The apron area is usually stamped concrete, as are the splitter islands. And what we show here is also stamped concrete in these areas because that little area needs to be available for tracking of trucks and buses. We have the same set of advantages and disadvantage titles. However, you'll see that there is somewhat a difference between this and the conventional. You'll have lower delays and queues under the advantages because you'll see it in the simulation. In a roundabout, it's really a moving queue, and people really only stop when they have to. If there's an available gap, people will use the gap. Reduces lane requirements between intersections. That goes back to, as I mentioned, under the conventional intersection, you may need turning lanes as you approach intersections, and you don't know necessarily what the extent of those might be. But with a roundabout, usually a single lane roundabout is sufficient to handle right and left turns in a continuous way. The difference or disadvantages here is you have equal priority for all approaches, and it can reduce the progression on high volume approaches because you will slow down. And for example, in the second part there, we cannot provide explicit priority to emergency vehicles because there's no opportunity to preempt something or to give someone the green light. The emergency vehicles, other than using their sirens and their horns, will sort of have to make their way through the intersection. Of course, they can ride over the apron and the splitter islands if they have to, but there is no dedicated priority to them. On the safety side, you reduce crash severity for all users, and there are fewer conflict points than there are with a conventional intersection. Of course, there's no left turn conflicts. The crash severity is primarily because the roundabout is a traffic calming measure. Vehicles are designed, or they're designed so vehicles go through them at about 20 miles an hour. So you're not going to get the high speed incidents. You have increase in single vehicle and fixed object crashes compared to other intersection treatments because people are constantly moving. You may get more side swipes as well. Multi-lane roundabouts, which is not the case here, but just as a general rule, they present more difficulties, mostly for people who have low vision, because it's very hard to negotiate when you have multi-lane roundabouts. Just even audibly, it's very difficult when you have that volume of traffic.
But as you point out, this is a single lane
This is a
roundabout?
single- yeah.
But is there concern for people? who
No,
have-
no, a single lane roundabout is not, what I'm trying to give here are just general advantages and disadvantages of a conventional four-way intersection and a roundabout. A single lane roundabout is not difficult to negotiate. They're very typical, and but people do it every day.
Even people who have difficulty
Yes.
seeing?
Yes.
Because we do have a lot of
Yes.
elderly living down.
Yes, they can negotiate these, and they're provided with all the physical means that a intersection would have, with the detectable warning fields, the proper sloped ramping, and dedicated crosswalks. Again, traffic calming, the reduced vehicular speeds, which I mentioned. The transition areas by reinforcing the notion of a significant change in driving environment. Now, what that means is that the driving environment is it's less conventional, if you will, and so people will tend to be more aware of this change and be more cognizant of the fact that they need to slow down, because you're approaching something that is a little bit out of the ordinary that you may find in this area. So in that sense, you're transitioning from a four-way intersection, maybe 2 blocks up, to an area where you have a roundabout, and there's a learning experience. I don't know if any of you have been up on Route 55 in Poughkeepsie. There's a series of 3 roundabouts that used to be,
Passer.
yeah, and they are almost the same size as this. Actually, they may even be a little bit smaller than this one. They've slowed the speeds down incredibly, and yet they still provide access to businesses on either side of Route 55. It's a very successful.
I mean, there's no way to know in the traffic study who is visiting for the first time and who is commuting and does this twice every single day of their lives.
Right.
But I would imagine that once this is in place for a little while, the vast majority of people who go through this are going to go through this every day, and so
Right.
it's going to be familiar to them.
It's
pretty
going to be
soon.
very familiar to them.
Are we going to see them going at? You said it tends to slow down cars to 20 miles an hour. That's just
they-
typical to single lane roundabouts,
They
whether
ha-
it's the same people every day or
They
it's
have
people
to.
for the first time.
They have to slow down. They really don't have a choice. It really is the maneuvering around a roundabout. It's essential that they slow down. Disadvantages, traffic as a traffic calming measure, it's obviously more expensive than putting a speed hump or a speed table across a road, which some municipalities use. In terms of space, it requires less queue storage space because you don't have as long queues, and that can reduce the need for right-of-way between intersections, because you don't have to have, for example, a conventional intersection. If you have a certain level of volume coming through the intersection and say your level of service isn't very good, you add a lane, the level of service goes up. That means you may need more right-of-way because now you're adding another lane or a turn lane. So with a single lane roundabout, you can handle more traffic than you could at a conventional intersection. We'll show you through the analysis the difference. But it does require more space just to build the thing. In this case, the land that's being used is land the village already owns. So that's a benefit. Environmental. The noise, air, and fuel consumption are probably going to be reduced because you don't have startups, you don't have cars sitting as long as they would at a red light, and therefore the fuel consumption will improve. Again, there's little stopping during off-peak periods, so even in the middle of the night, you're not going to get those startup noise that you hear. The spatial requirements in terms of disadvantages, maybe you're taking away a little bit of a parkland. That may be very special to someone or to some group. That's what that disadvantage refers to. Non-motorized users. Pedestrians only need to consider one direction of conflicting traffic at a time. You come to a roundabout, you have a refuge area where the splitter island is. You really only have to look to your left. Get to the splitter island, you look to your right, and you continue across. And again, you're crossing 2 cars behind away from the roundabout to begin with. So people are slowing down because the roundabout's there. So if there is any conflict, it's going to be at a much lower speed than it would be at an intersection where there's a green light, for example. Bicyclists have an option of negotiating roundabouts depending upon their skill and comfort level. Some bicyclists, certain roundabouts, in fact, have separate ramps for bikes. You're not going to need them in this case. One problem with those kind of ramps is people confuse the bike ramps with the pedestrian ramps, and vice versa. So we try not to have that combination. Pedestrians with vision impairment may have difficulty finding crosswalks and determining when and if a vehicle have yielded at a crosswalk. But again, this is a learning process, and there's a whole section that the ADA has that deals with pedestrians at roundabouts and how to best design to meet their needs. Operational maintenance, no signal hardware equipment to maintain. It just doesn't exist. It may require landscape maintenance in the center island if that's what the village chooses to do. And snow plowing can be a little bit more challenging for the highway department. The access management, you can do U-turns with a roundabout. You don't have to have U-turns made mid-block. On the other hand, it reduces the number of available gaps for mid-block unsignalized intersections and driveways. So what that means is if you have a driveway that's coming out downstream or upstream because you don't have a signal stopping cars, you don't have gaps created.
I just want to point out that last time you were here, the snow plowing was actually supposed to be easier, because I remember you saying that on corners, you get all of this squares, right?
Well, you can have
90-degree
snow
angle
build
where
up.
there is, whereas here, you're literally in some ways easier because they plow right through, because we talked about how there's a firehouse actually not far, and you said, the plows actually have an easier time, and they do a better job cleaning because they're just shoving it all down rather than creating these
Yeah, well,
bottlenecks on the corners.
by challenging, I mean more of if they go around, and where do they dump the snow as they go around. In other words, you have to have a refuge area for the snow. It will not be at an intersection. You're right. That's the best part, because the last thing you want to do is pile snow at a corner where your sight distances are cut down, whether you have a red light or a green light. But it can be a little bit more difficult, the snow plowing.
Both ways are challenging, and
Right.
depending on the amount of snow
And the
is what's going to
skill.
dictate the challenge. So it's something that, in the case of a roundabout, I'm sure we would get used to it. We would have a learning curve just like anybody else.
And that's basically the graphic for the future roundabout. Now, levels of service. You're going to see Ron's going to run a simulation for you in a little bit of both conventional versus the roundabout solution. In this case, we did the analysis was for 2016 existing conditions, AM and PM peak hour. And right now, as of May, you're operating at an overall level of service C during the morning and afternoon peak hours, although on the Central Avenue southbound left turn, you experience the level of service D. We then projected the volumes to 2026. We increased the volumes by 10%, reran the analyses, and you can see again you're still at a level of service C. Your delays have increased slightly. That one level of service D is still a D and hasn't improved. If we go with a roundabout, your overall roundabout is at A in the AM and PM today. If we were to develop it, it would be at a B in the AM in 2026 and a A in the PM in 2026. Now, Central Avenue, and you'll see this on the simulation, that had to be treated separately than as part of the roundabout. It really isn't part of the entire plan. It sort of tees into Central, and so in that sense, you have a level of service A. It has to be analyzed a little bit differently.
Peter,
Yep.
if I may interject, I know we may be familiar with it because we've seen you present a few times, but for those who may be seeing this presentation for the first time, if you could just do a quick snippet on your design standards, what you try to design for, and what A versus F means
A.
in an intersection design.
A is, well, it's the best you can get. It's like a grade in school. D is, D you might experience, you wouldn't design to D. D is what you would permit during a peak hour at a main intersection. Most agencies accept that in a peak hour. I would say that a C is what you really try to shoot for. If you're designing, you're not going to design necessarily for the best. You're not going to certainly design for the worst. If you want a C, that's good, but that's not going to necessarily give you enough capacity going forward. You can have a C today, and you can have a development happen, and that C can drop relatively quickly to a D, and that means that you then have to make some other physical improvements. And in a downtown area, you have limited right of way, particularly this particular location. You're not going to start taking right of way and buildings to widen. So I would say that you would ordinarily you'd say a C is fine. A B was probably a very good thing to design to, and you'd never go for a D, E, or an F. That you get into the D range, you're bordering on the next level of traffic, dropping you down to an E, which is capacity.
And what are we today?
You're at a C today.
We are at a C today.
Yes.
So it doesn't make a difference if we upgrade the signal. That's not going to change the amount of wait time. It's going to be a similar.
No, it's going to yeah, it'll be the
If
same.
we go with a conventional.
Yeah, it
signal,
will stay the same. Right, it will stay the same. These are the cost relationships between the conventional intersection and a roundabout. We've broken it down into groups of excavation, removal, and relocation, and existing structures and lighting. Full depth pavement, those are those blue areas that I showed that were currently not pavement, that would become pavement, with mountable islands and resurfacing, new sidewalks, new curbing, maintenance and protection of traffic, which is a very big item in this when you're actually building stuff, is to keep, what do we do with the traffic? The drainage, signing and striping plans that would be developed to show all the new signing and that would be placed. And obviously for a roundabout, it's different than it is for a conventional intersection. You have valve and hydrant adjustments. And then of course for the new traffic signal for conventional intersection, you have new PEDs everywhere. You have new mast arms. You have new conduit, new pull boxes, push buttons. Our recent experiences, we used to do a T intersection 5 years ago for about $85,000. The T intersection, a simple T intersection today is running about $140,000-$150,000. It's the prices have gone crazy in the design. And we just put a little amount there for landscaping in the center island of the roundabout. We have not considered, in either case, streetscape features, rain gardens, anything else like that. That you could, if there's historic preservation considerations, we just put $50,000 under both categories, just to put a placeholder there. That could go up or down depending upon what selection you take.
Peter, again, if I may append that, the reason that Peter and I talked about putting in a placeholder of $50,000 in there for HPC considerations is because we do want to show it to them in either situation, whether we do roundabout or conventional, and that number can easily be 150. It can easily be 5,000, depending on the amount of details that we want to put into the specifications that we use in the design. We can put very simple DOT specifications on mast arms, for example, or we can put high-end mast arms that have a historical component to them, or aesthetic. And the environmental components like rain gardens and the like are significantly different if you do a roundabout versus a conventional because of the space that you're afforded. So, it depending on what ancillary components you want to put into this very rudimentary design that's being costed in front of you can really flip it either way. So I think in summary, I want to say that as we go back and forth, the cost component that maybe we thought the signalization savings, the significance of that goes away depending on the amount of additional items you put into the design. The one thing that's not in here that is not in Peter's presentation is the operation,
Yeah.
the long-term operation component for the energy use, which is it's not insignificant, but it's not that much money for the signals. I think it's a few $1,000s a year we get charged by NYPA. But then also the operation and maintenance in the DPW budget every year for replacing the heads, the things that get hit, the pedestrian signals that get hit. That happens often, and I think we costed that for the one intersection, because we average them out around the village of about $15,000 a year. So over the life of the intersection, that adds up.
I'd like Ron now to pull up the simulations, which I think you may find quite interesting.
And to get back to the,
Go back, I think.
yeah.
All the way back.
No, I think we have to.
We have to go all the way. Can we get back to the? Just hit escape.
Oh,
Okay. There you go. All right.
Okay. Okay, Ron Riemann, work with Peter at Mazer Consulting. As Peter mentioned, we did traffic counts in May, so we ran, as you saw on the level service table, AM and PM existing conditions with the signal and with the roundabout. And then, as Peter also mentioned, we projected those volumes to 2026, and we ran AM and PM with the roundabout as well as the signal. We did a video of our simulation. It's a program that we use to generate the levels of service as well as the model to show, how the traffic is, going through the intersection. And in this case, we'll show you how it's operating with the signal as well as the roundabout. I'll start with, and we can go back to the AM if you like, but I'll start with the PM since that's the one that had a level service D on Central Avenue. So the first simulation we'll run is the future 2026 PM with signalization if we kept it the way it is right now. It's a 15, our analysis is based on an hour. This is a 15-minute simulation, 2x speed, so it's a 7.5 video. As you can see, what Peter mentioned a couple of times with the advantages and disadvantages. Right now on Main Street, traffic is stopped, so you have queuing, environmental concerns. Now, Spring Street and Brandreth and Central Avenue stops, and Main Street, is going. And
Note every once in a while, excuse me, Ron, you'll
Yeah.
see a little dot across the intersection. We actually, when we did our counts,
yeah, you can see someone coming right now across Main Street.
Oh,
Correct.
that's the pedestrian?
pedestrian, and when we did our counts, we also counted pedestrians. And this, so they are represented in this simulation.
Right. As you could tell, we took into account truck percentages, as Peter said, pedestrians based on actual counts. So this is basically what we're projecting in the future. And again, if you remember the level of service table, this is an operation of a level service C. And again, you can see on certain approaches, you're going to have traffic stopping. And you can see, as Peter also mentioned, that, pedestrians will cross when you have certain movements stopping, so they maybe have an easier path to cross.
I just want to clarify, this is a reflection of the traffic counts from May of this year with the new signalization as you've designed, if we go with the convention.
Yes, and it's also, we also took into a growth factor, so these actually reflect the existing 2016 volumes, and we grew it out 10 years. So this reflects,
Oh, so this is 10 years from now?
2026.
Okay,
Yes.
it is, okay, thank you.
2026.
Okay. Which is pretty similar.
About the,
Crosswalk on the other side. Where's the crosswalk over there? There's no crosswalk on the,
there is this back, you mean in
oh, I just
Central?
don't see it, yeah, okay.
So what about the crosswalks in terms of, is there a time when if somebody wants to cross and they're using the ped heads, right? Does that create does all the traffic stop, or is it in sync with the changes of the lights and the traffic?
In this particular case, we could actually simulate that, and you would see a difference. In this case, we don't have an exclusive PED phase. That's correct, right?
Yes, correct.
So that we don't have it where, as I mentioned before, they call it a barn dance, where somebody presses the button and everybody stops, and then anyone can cross on any of the four crosswalks.
Increased delay.
And that will increase delay significantly for vehicles, particularly during peak hours, because
And what grade would we have then?
I would say you drop to at least at level service D.
probably a level service D. You drop a level of service.
For comparison, the state does have a designated pedestrian window of 30 seconds, I believe, down at 9 and 133 here. That's a state intersection, and they have a dedicated pedestrian crossing there. So you could see the impact of that, particularly during the rush hour.
And yeah, and that length of time that you take, you have to figure a person's going to walk 3.5 feet per second, and you have to take the widest approach, which would be the Spring Street approach, and then you set the time for them to cross, and then you have to add 7 seconds to that. So if it's 35 feet and it's 3.5 feet per second, you get 10 seconds plus another 7 seconds. You have 17 seconds is taken away from your green time for both approaches. So you're gonna, and when you only have a 90-second cycle, perhaps you're taking a significant portion of that cycle.
So you're not recommending that we have
I
the
would-
barn dance?
No.
Can I just, if I want to go to the Olive Opera House, which is on the corner of Central and Brandreth,
Right.
where do I cross?
Well, unfortunately, the simulation doesn't show you crosswalks. Okay. It just doesn't.
Okay,
Go back to the original drawing.
Yeah,
so there, okay.
it would be at the
I
intersection.
just wanted to make sure they were there, okay.
Okay, again, this is, we base our analysis on a 60-minute, peak hour. This is a 15-minute simulation. I don't know if you want to run through it, look at it a little more, or you like, okay. We got one no there. It's a nice,
I think we get
And-
the
Yes.
idea.
Unless there's something else that's gonna happen.
And Ron,
no, no.
Ron,
Somebody's
Yes.
getting hit by a car.
again, Ron,
What
for
does that take?
everybody's edification, Ron, this is not one day. It's a few weeks worth of data, and you take the average to create the day, correct?
No, it's actually a 1-day count, but we compare it to New York State DOT historical data, so it is a representation of, what happens throughout the course of the year. Any given day, the volumes change.
Ooh. That was a dangerous left-hand turn. The truck almost hit that.
No, okay. I should have took
I'm
your
gonna get
advice
dizzy if
and
I keep
I
watching
mean, no,
this.
that was
No.
a risky move.
No.
I mean,
I should have took your advice and you said, is anything else going to happen? I should just shut it off there. No, this is a video of our simulation. So just like with any kind of conversion to like a video, it's kind of like there's like almost little gaps in the system. So it's like a ghost car. It looks like the car is going through another car. It's just because it's converted to a video. It's like a little delay. See, like that truck just almost,
Just appeared.
Yes.
A bus disappeared earlier, I get
I mean,
it, okay. We get the
as technical as this stuff is, it's pretty amazing that we could do this, but it's not, perfect. Okay, and I'll just do it real quick. The same 2026 PM traffic volumes with the roundabout. And as you can see, and as Peter's presentation, you don't have cars, stopping like the signal, queuing. They kind of slow up to all merge into the roundabout.
They look like they're going really fast.
It's okay. Yes, it's at 2 times the speed.
Okay. They're not going faster than they
No.
do in the convention.
No.
It just looks like it, okay.
But because you don't have the crosswalks are 2 car lengths behind.
Right.
So what I'm missing in this whole thing, which people were concerned about, is, so if I cross, and there are 2 cars in front of me and I'm crossing behind a car, right? So the third car and up would be stopping, right? Because they have to let the pedestrians walk. There are no lights. Right? If the pedestrian's standing on the curb, you have to stop. And if another one comes, you have to still wait for them and all that. So where's that in your simulation?
Yeah, we'll go back to the drawings that we showed you earlier, and Pete will
Well,
point.
while we're looking at this,
Okay.
so when you're talking like 2 car
So
lengths
it's
back, it's like
about
there should
there.
be a crosswalk here.
And
It would be,
and
this doesn't, unfortunately,
split islands.
unfortunately, this
Yeah.
doesn't show the splitter islands.
Here.
But here,
Right,
and
over there.
I think there, right?
I don't know where it would be here, that confuses.
Yeah,
Well,
they,
for me, it's the traffic flow. Like, did you take that into,
This-
even if it's not in there, is it being accounted for
Yes.
about how this is moving? Because
These,
It doesn't
this,
feel like it is.
yeah, this represents on each approach. You know, again, they assume a random arrival. You know, there's a lot that goes into the modeling.
Right.
But in this particular case, unfortunately, the model doesn't have the splitter islands in there where we would actually have the crosswalk. And I don't even think we could, if we wanted to, show where that dot move. You'll see the dot move
Yeah,
across the
dot's
intersection.
not walking where the crosswalk will be.
Right,
This sort of-
because the model doesn't allow you to do that.
But the pedestrians are included in the analysis, maybe not as well as you'd like to see for the visual, but comes into the projections on how it develops the levels of service. So the level of service that, Peter mentioned before, that you saw on the table. With the roundabout, you have a level service B, primarily because you have increased capacity. Cars aren't being stored there, and it's like almost like a free flow. But the analysis also takes into consideration the same truck factors and the same pedestrian numbers that we use for the signal. So you are comparing, as best you can, apples to apples with the inputs, volume, pedestrians, trucks.
Well, if that's the case, then this says that there's never a backup.
No, and yes, there wouldn't be. Number one,
Never more than a car or
Yes.
2 cars backing up Main Street. On the other one, there were 8 cars, 9 cars, 5 cars. That's why I'm asking if this is taking the pedestrians, because intuitively,
That's-
it doesn't seem like that would be the case, Frank.
you want to explain how
Well,
we
you
stop
can
in
see
the
a
center?
pedestrian
Yeah.
just cross there on Spring Street. I mean, the cars are slowing down. It might not be the actual place where the, where the
Alright.
sidewalks
We'll go
are,
back
but
to the original
Okay.
drawing, and
It's just-
Peter
it's
will
fine, yeah.
show you where the islands were, where the pedestrian stops and continues.
I'm
So-
just
Yeah, it's-
concerned that when we post this, the purpose is to enlighten people, and I'm just afraid that the same thing we're asking.
Well, if
Before you go back to the drawing, do you think we could see the AM so we could see the queuing on Main?
Maybe the AM would be different. Roundabout it, yeah,
You want the roundabout?
yeah.
Well, the queue will show up on the signalization one, not on the roundabout one, so.
Oh,
And the AM and PM volumes are, except for directionally, the total intersection volumes are pretty much the
right now,
same.
there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cars are waiting, bam. And a 6th and 7th and 8th right behind them.
And now they're all speeding up so that they can make the light.
And that was one of the disadvantages I think Peter mentioned. you
Yeah,
know.
no, understood. And it's a downhill too, so you're like, whoosh. Okay. 1, 2, 3.
somebody didn't make the left-hand turn. I guess they go straight, I guess.
Are we happy with the,
Yeah,
okay, we'll go
Well,
back
then
to,
let's see what happens. We've
Yeah,
only
now
watched
we'll
one
do
red
the
light.
same
See,
number of
It was only
cars,
like 4
theoretically.
cars. I mean, I feel like we saw more queuing up actually in the PM one.
all right, so now.
I can go back to PM if you like.
No,
It's-
that's
No,
all right.
that's
How
fine,
about the
that's fine, this
roundabout?
is fine. This doesn't,
And then if we could we'll go back to the presentation and maybe Peter could explain the pedestrians.
Wait, did you want to see the roundabout AM?
Yeah, I mean,
Oh,
I
I'm
can't
sorry.
imagine the roundabout you're saying seriously never has a backup, is what you're saying.
Right.
By definition.
It's basically free flow. They don't really have to stop. They slow up and go through, but they never have to stop.
Well, what about the, at the top of Main Street, though, where we've got a traffic light that we don't
It'll
control?
adjust
that's-
itself in a second.
That's, by the state, I mean.
There we go.
Oh, there is a pedestrian, okay, so it's 1, 2, 3. Oh. I guess that's the whole idea. Okay.
Yeah, the thing is, it almost looks empty because everyone keeps moving. Okay,
So with this in mind, you're going to show us the picture again so we can now see where the crosswalks would be?
right. Keep going.
Pretty far down.
There we are. So the crosswalks would be placed usually at the back of the splitter islands. Back here. Now, this is a 30% design. If we want to make these splitter islands larger, we can take a little bit more and we can make the splitter islands larger on all four sides. This side is a little problematic because of the location of the buildings to the sidewalk. There's not to the curb. There's not as much room there. So this particular approach is a little bit more of a problem. I would probably recommend the crosswalk being back here, and I think we discussed, Ron, what was it, stopping on Central, putting a stop on Central so that Brandreth, which actually has the heavier volume, would actually be your main approach to the roundabout.
You're saying put a stop light on something?
Stop sign.
Stop sign.
Yeah. And again, these are things that, when you get into the more detailed design, can be accommodated. But the other crosswalks are basically supposed to be a couple car lengths behind the roundabout itself.
I'm just curious, why would you put a stop sign on Central Avenue?
Only because you don't want Brandreth moving free and Central moving free
Okay.
as it approaches the roundabout.
Okay, it's not a pedestrian related thing.
No.
It's so that the
Just-
people at
So
Central
the
are
two
taking
cars,
a look. Okay.
right.
Okay.
Anything else?
One thing about crosswalks that I'd like to add is that, depending on the final design and the splitter island location on Spring Street, both options are going to afford the ability for a crosswalk in and around the area of Maple to the other side into the post office parking lot. That's shown as an added feature on both designs, but it might be 2 and 1 on the roundabout design because of the location of the splitter island. But on the conventional design, it also shows a crosswalk at the intersection of Maple and Spring.
But when you say it also may be 2 and 1 in the roundabout, the one that is created as part of the roundabout may suffice because it will
Right.
be so close to the.
Right,
to the
depending on the
sidewalk.
location and where it lays out relative to the bank exit and the
Right.
parking lot exit. You don't want to put a crosswalk there, so if it's too close, if we can't, and we end up coming to the other side of those parking lots, then it would be a little short-sighted maybe to put two so close to one another.
I hope that this helped.
Well, I'm sure we have questions. We all have,
Yep,
can we all come back
yeah.
to our regular seats
Yep.
and ask some questions? Welcome. Okay. Who wants to start? There was a lot there.
I'll go.
Go right ahead, John.
So, yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, I've been kind of a fan of this for a while, so, I think it's, I mean, you've got some really good data here, and that's very helpful. I think the big concern I have is the, and I guess I'll just ask this, the traffic flows and the counts and everything you had during the different times that you were also taking into consideration the traffic patterns that exist on Route 9, correct?
Well, we didn't specifically count Route 9. No, we didn't. That wasn't part of our
Well, no, I mean, but
tasking,
you're counting the cars that are coming
Yes.
into that intersection from Route 9.
from right now.
Right.
Exactly.
So, because one of my concerns, obviously, is that we don't have control of the traffic signals that are on Route 9, and I know that anecdotally, some people have said, "Oh, well, if you put that roundabout in there, everything will be backed up, and the roundabout will be backed up because the traffic signals are all jammed up on, on Route 9 and everything else, because they're at certain times of day. I mean, you're lucky if you don't have to wait for a second signal to go through on 9 to turn from Main Street to make that left-hand turn onto Route 9. I mean, I can tell you from my own experience.
If there are volumes available that are recent that the village has, we can certainly petition the state for them. We can easily modify this simulation to include those intersections.
Yeah, I mean, that really would be my only concern. I mean, obviously, when you compare the two designs, if you don't have vehicles standing because of lights, the traffic's constantly moving. So
I can add to that a little bit, Peter. With regard to that intersection, the state did just re-signal that and put some improved timing in there, and designated in the designated box area there. I can tell you intrinsically, I noticed a little bit of a difference. It's not so much the queuing that holds you up on Church. It's usually, sometimes you get held up if you're only 4 cars deep. It's because of the volume and the intersection congestion on 9. So as far as queuing all the way back to the intersection of Spring and Main, with a roundabout or a conventional intersection, you really don't see it too much now, even during the highest rush hour, because it's a lot of times the queuing might go back into Sassanora Plaza and catch that whole area where Main comes back into Church there. But the volume is the volume. So whether you're going through a conventional intersection or coming through a roundabout, it's going to be the same volume heading up to Church in that area. So even in the worst case scenario, you do back up, you're just going to back up and queue into a roundabout anyway, which will free flow when it releases up top. But I don't. We will follow up with the state. It's a good idea, so we can have some substance to what we say with regard to the flow from the intersection. But I think the volume is still going to be the volume, whether they get stalled at a conventional or they get sent through a roundabout.
Since we mentioned the state and Route 9, I'll just point out at this point, and I think I don't know if you checked your email earlier today or later today, but we did formally take the step that Assemblywoman Sandy Galiff asked us to do, so that we could ask her to facilitate a meeting for us with the Department of Transportation, for them to revisit the concept of improving the traffic flow on their state routes that cut through our roads, through our village. The core of our real traffic backups is not the 5 corners. It's where Route 9 meets Route 133, right out there. But we don't have the power to change that. We need the state to work with us. And our Assemblywoman has offered to help coordinate that conversation with the DOT, which has been revisited more than once. And we're looking to re-engage the conversation, just for people who, anybody who ever drives through the village realizes that that's the core of our traffic problems. That's not what this is designed to address, but I did want people to know that on a parallel path, we are looking at the challenges that we have for traffic on Route 9 and 133, since you brought up the state at this point. Thought I'd chime in. What's next? You're good?
Manny?
I mean, I'll just say one thing. Excuse me, Manny. I think it's just remarkable, the difference between the lights and the roundabout in terms of the quality of the traffic flow. That there's just such a remarkable difference between
why
the
the
two. I mean,
states-
we're going to A's and B's, and,
Right.
when if right now we're at C's and D's.
Right.
So I think I think that empirically kind of speaks for itself.
Thank you, John. You actually stole 2 of the questions that I had in regards to the problems for the Route 9, and as the mayor mentioned, there is a meeting coming up. It's been a while, I guess, since we visited this component of our downtown, and I think it's essential for us to actually fully compare apples to apples, which, thank you for that, and thank you, that time engineer Frioli, when we were going over that. I'm happy to see where this board fully can understand what that means. To me, one of the biggest issues was understanding money-wise. Right now, there's a difference between about $35,000 between one and another. So that kind of takes almost out of that equation to me, related to money. Not that money is not important, it's just the design and what is the difference between reality on the traffic signal and the roundabout itself, and what will that look in our downtown. You actually had given me a lot of information that is very helpful to understand, and definitely with the graphics, with the traffic pattern and everything else. So I don't really don't have any questions. I'll probably just more like general comments on it. So thank you.
Thank you.
This is great. I mean, some of it is anti-intuitive for me, so it was great to see it visually. I went back. I was saying to the mayor that when I first saw this, the reason I think it was you, right, Manny, that started this conversation about it. The idea was a 40 to 50% cost saving. So every time I see you guys with the presentation, the numbers go up and up and up on both. And now they're about equal. And you should put the next 5 to 10 years, because what I thought was another selling point for roundabouts is cheaper maintenance, although you then have maintenance of plants and water systems that have to be redone, so maybe it's not such a big saving. So it's not so much a question as one of my criteria was, wow, this will save some money. Right now, it doesn't look like it's actually doing that. It might be better for the ecology. It might be more progressive. I know everyone around municipalities around the country want to go to roundabouts. This is not just New York. But it's almost a shame that every time we see this, I feel like we shouldn't have you back anymore.
Yeah, well,
because,
I'm happy to come anytime. I will say that in the designs that we've done, and we're still working on one that was up in Chappaqua that they're tossing around. There's a real interest in them because of the safety aspect is amazing. I mean, it cuts probably a third the severity. It cuts in unbelievably about 70% in terms of severe accidents. Now, I don't know if you've had many down here, but the point is that it does cut a lot of severe right angle
It
accidents.
was
I don't
T-boned
know.
last year.
Yeah. And that's why the state likes to put them in where they can. If the land's available, they would prefer putting a roundabout in than.
Although
a
people in
traffic
the
signal.
audience, when we did this, kept really harping on this idea, and they might be right, I just don't know, that when you have people walking between cars, right, because you got two in the front of you and you walk behind a car, and they were talking about how it doesn't seem safe with strollers, children, it doesn't seem intuitively safer, but you're saying that it is.
The analogy that I think we gave the audience last time was the analogy of a splitter island like Sassanora Plaza, where people cross right now on the Aqueduct Trail. That would be the equivalent of their cross. They look left and go to the island, and then they look right.
Yeah.
Technically, I think traffic law means once the person's in the right of way at all, they have the right of way.
Right.
Not everybody abides by that, hence the splitter island. But
Yeah.
I think that would be analogous to the crossing that they would
Yeah.
have to undertake down there. I think the other main concern they had was the parking loss in the
Yes.
downtown area, which we haven't discussed yet. But the they took time to size the roundabout accordingly, but with as little impact as possible. I think maybe since the last time we sat down, we might have nudged it over a little bit into the Market Square area, since it is our property, so we can be a little
Yeah, we
know,
can do that.
free with that, and pulled it a little bit away from the stores that had the concern. We're still losing those corner parking spots, but as you know, this summer we did embark on some parking creation down there. So I think the net loss, and I'm sure someone's going to correct me if I say it wrong, but if anybody's memory serves differently, I think the net loss on the road proper, whether it was on Main or Spring, the net parking loss was 10 or 11 spots.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think you're right.
Sounds about right. And we created 3 additional parking spots on Main Street, metered parking on the road itself, and we created 11 additional spots in the post office parking lot this past summer,
And it's safer.
just to do it.
I mean, the way
Yeah.
you set it up is safer, in my opinion, anyway. I'm not an expert.
And in terms of the pedestrian, if I might, remember when you have the roundabout, it is traffic calming, so vehicles are slowing down as they're approaching the roundabout. So that helps the pedestrians as well.
Yeah, with proper signage and markings for
Yes.
the crosswalks. I mean,
Yeah.
people approaching it are going to realize that that's what that is,
Exactly.
right?
If you go down there any lunch hour on a day when people are out and about, where this splitter island on Main Street is now, on the east side of Main, so on the Sassanora side of Main Street from the intersection, people are crossing now where they would eventually be crossing where the splitter island would be, in that area. Same goes for the western side of Main Street. People typically cross,
Yeah.
you know, west of the intersection, and just as a reference point to go into the area of Dolka's or the coffee shop
Right.
now. That's where people are really crossing now. And you heard the one constituent that made the comment that we're trying to incorporate into design. People are crossing Spring Street in the area of Maple. They're not going up there to cross the intersection anyway, so to have an intersection crossing pulled back, I think as far as designing to what's actually happening, I think the splitter crosses are
Addressing those.
would
Yeah.
It's more
meld
reflective
more.
of the reality of how people
you.
use
Yes.
people actually cross the street, which
Organically,
is
yeah.
one of the goals of Complete Streets, which is the policy that we adopted a couple of years ago, which is to have the flow of pedestrian traffic be painted to reflect the reality, because that's safer for the pedestrians. Quantel, you had a lot of concerns and questions about this after tonight's presentation. Do you have any more?
Certain things are cleared up, and given the fact that the splitters will be where people cross, and I cross those places too, that does alleviate some things. Still processing, but if I have any further questions, I'll definitely reach out. So,
I just want to go back to, thank you, the parking numbers. From the time that, since we last talked about this, we've increased parking by more than a dozen spots. If we went with the roundabout, we would be decreasing parking from where it is today, but we'd still be in a better position than where we were 6 months ago, because we changed the structure of the triangle lot in front of the post office. And I just want to put parking into a longer-term perspective. These signals have been here for, we think, over 30 years. Whatever we do in this intersection is going to be here for generations to come. And we have 2 out of the 5 corners are undeveloped and are likely to be developed in less than 30 years. Heck, it's been 40 years. I suppose we could go another 40, but I don't think that's the intention. So there's going to be significant changes to the landscape of our downtown as far as what's in these spaces. And some of that's going to have to be parking allotments, whether it's underground, whether it's around the corner, whether it's probably not going to be flat open parking spaces forever in the Main Street, the Market Square properties. So there's going to be significant changes. So we need to design and decide on this intersection for the long term, not for 4 parking spots on this corner and 3 parking spots on this corner as they exist today and may exist for the next 5 years. We need to be looking at this long term. That's part of our responsibility. So we are certainly cognizant of the need for parking downtown and the importance that that plays in supporting our businesses, which is why DPW did the project that they did, and I'm really pleased. And I never have trouble getting a spot in the downtown lot now, and if we lost some parking, I might have to loop around and look again, and that's normal to me because I'm willing to walk a block to the store. But I understand that parking is going to be a concern. It's going to be something that's raised, and I would say if we're keeping tabs on what has the advantages where, I think cost, it's a negligible change one way or the other, even though going forward we wouldn't have to replace broken signals and such. Those are not huge numbers to be considering. I don't think that would make or break a decision. It was sort of interesting, and I'm sure we'll hear from emergency responders. Right now, we don't have the capacity for a fire truck to go through the intersection, all the lights to change for them, but you're saying that if we did a conventional signal, that would be an option?
Yes.
And so I'm sure that they would love that. So from a first responder perspective, the conventional signal would be better. From a parking perspective, the conventional signal would be better. From an everyday usage perspective,
I don't think you said that. Did you say that?
No, what I said was the emergency vehicles don't have a with a roundabout.
Yeah.
They don't have a means of
And you can
dedicated.
only
I'm
go
sorry,
to-
not-
and
I
you
don't
can
mean
only
that-
go at a certain speed because it's a roundabout.
what,
so
I don't
see
mean
what-
I don't
see
mean
what
I don't
you're
mean better
saying.
than it is today. It would be if we had the roundabout, it wouldn't be any better or worse for emergency vehicles with a roundabout than today. If we went to an upgraded conventional signal, then they would get like superpowers
Right,
going
they'd
through
have a
you.
Go
little-
straight through, because we would
We
manage
would-
a light, whereas a roundabout, it's there, you can't move it,
So that would be kind of a bell and whistle that I didn't
Right.
even know existed.
Right.
And then the conventional signal also wouldn't take away much, if any, parking. It would, maybe some, because there's
A
some
little
bump outs
bit,
and
but I
stuff, a
don't-
little
yeah.
bit, but less. From a function as a pedestrian on a day-to-day basis and as a driver on a day-to-day basis, we're talking about A's and a couple of B's versus not changing, not getting any better, just being C's and getting slightly worse over the next 10 years with the conventional. So I think functionally, as we use it at any given time, by muscle power or engine power, the roundabout seems to heavily have the advantage in those categories.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I
I
agree.
mean, an A is better than a C.
A is way better.
As a parent, an A is better than a C. Okay. And everything else kind of seemed to be a bit of a wash, whether it was finance or the cost and snow removal and. Oh, and then the other thing is when there are accidents with the roundabout, because everybody's going slower, it's much less severe, whether
Yes. That's an absolute.
that's-
car
the whole key.
accidents, the pedestrian, because everybody's going so slower. So in that sense, just on a day-to-day basis, it
And the type of
functions-
accidents, you won't have right angle accidents.
Okay,
Oh, all right, because there's no angle.
so that's why there's less damage and people get less hurt and, okay. Okay, wow, all right.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank
I'd
you.
like to discuss next steps and timelines.
please.
I guess about 3-4 weeks ago, I was in front of you all with the consultants working on the Broadway Bridge project. At that time, we mentioned that that project's schedule may be skewed because of our application for a grant. I don't have any news to report on that. It's still being considered. When I get it, you'll know. But as far as this project, because of its location and the proximity to the Broadway Bridge and the diversions that would have to take place in either option, but more significantly with the roundabout because of the maintenance and protection of traffic associated with the construction. I talked with Peter, I talked with a bridge consultant, and I considered it myself. And it is not advisable to do both projects anywhere near concurrently. So in the perfect world, if we do get grant money, it's going to delay the design process of the bridge and put that out possibly into next year.
2018, summer.
Correct. Which is okay because of the windfall that we would receive to offset the monies, and the bridge is not in a red flag state, it's only in yellow flag. And we put measures in there to maintain that. The intersection, because of that possibility, I would like to consider moving along with the design and taking one of these 30% designs and taking it to a 75 and eventual construction document phase so we can put that out to bid. If we get the bridge monies and delay the construction of the bridge, put this intersection out to bid in the later part of this winter or early spring for construction in the summertime when school is out.
When will we find out about the bridge money?
We're supposed to find out next month. So it works, and then we can kind of stagger it either way depending on how we want to proceed.
So
but
it's
with
not the
that-
order of priority of need that you're suggesting, it's the
Financial.
order of both finance and that both cannot be done anywhere near each other because they'll block up the entire
Correct.
downtown.
Because the diversion pattern for a large part of
Would
the
be,
intersection work
You're
is
doing two
through
major
aqueduct.
sites.
Yeah, and
Okay.
they're right next to each other. They come into the same hotspot.
Understood. So that's the criteria you're using.
So that said, I don't recommend you deciding tonight, because I think what everybody's seeing for the first time, and it being on an off hour at 6 o'clock in a work session environment, I think there's people who are going to want to watch this and want to come to you in the
Yeah.
next week or two to talk about it, and then you can figure out what you want to do. And I think if I get the answer in early to mid-November, and maybe the first or second meeting in November, we can still hold to that course.
Are you
and-
recommending either scenario? Because, I mean, they're about the same money. So do you have a preference personally? I mean, as the engineer? Not personally, but
you know, you put all the things in the kitty. You had the police who were here last time, and they recommended roundabout. I think the volunteer fire both weighed in. I've talked to both offline and online, and I've heard both. You know, if it works, it works, and if we show a model where the larger apparatus worked and it did, then they were okay with it. But some not so sure. Yeah, I get to the point where I'm just like everybody else. It's new to me, so there's a little apprehension. And then I also have the aesthetic side of a conventional intersection. It's, you know, seeing that versus what you've seen, you know, people have seen there forever. With regard to the streetscape is something that, you know, is going to be tough to digest for some. So, you know, from an engineering perspective, I would probably I would be excited to work on a roundabout. It's kind of neat for me, and I think there's technical merit to it as well. And the financial component is kind of out the window now because of the
It's about the same.
yeah.
I actually do have one question. If the Market Square properties and the adjacent parking lot, the post office parking lot, was ever developed where there was retail or you know, where they had to be accessed from vehicles, which design would actually work better?
There's no way you just
It really depends on the site design, what's available. It's hard to answer that. I mean, you'd want to act, regardless of which design was used, you'd want to access them as far away from the intersection as you could. Again, the one thing with the conventional intersection is you will have cars queued in front of those stores on all four approaches
Both
when
sides.
the light's red.
Yeah.
With the roundabout, the cars will keep moving. There'll be gaps in the traffic, certainly. But you won't have large queues develop. I mean, as you could see there was hardly a queue at all developed, and that was numbers projected out to 2026. So my recommendation would be, whatever comes in before the board, is you make sure those points of access are as far away from either intersection.
But
you know.
currently, your simulation is based on the current access points, right?
Well,
Right.
we don't have.
That's what it's based on.
Yeah, but we
What
don't.
you have now.
I think, Peter, if I may, it's a good point, and particularly with regard to Market Square. You know, as the engineer, I obviously weigh in on the site plan design, so I would have that. This would all be enveloped in the review for that. But what you didn't state, but what I think you were going towards is the roundabout does encroach on the Market Square property.
Yeah,
So
not so much the other one.
that's something for you guys to consider, because if and when you ever went back out to RFP, that would have to be revised to reflect the same. Our lot that is adjacent to the post office lot, which was also out for RFP at one time with the development there in the comprehensive plan, was one of the main reasons we made the Spring Street two-way, because what is the pass-through over there is technically a paper road, which in the development of that building would eventually be a two-way road connecting Main near the post office to Spring at Maple. And that was slated to be developed as a road versus additional building because of that component of access in and out of that building. And keeping it away from the intersection, worrying about gaining access from that building. So just conceptually, and I don't want to say this is what a planning board would decide to do in 10 or 15 or 20 years from now, but if and when there was ever development on Market Square, I would envision that an access point at the entrance to the village parking now into the area, and then an exit point would probably be somewhere out near the Church Street side, right by the Verizon building. So they would also be removed from having to engage in that intersection.
So looking back at our calendars, next week is the 19th. It's a legislative session. We would certainly expect to hear if members of the public come and speak during the public comment period. They'll have had a chance, hopefully, to watch this video and get some more insights into the design options that we're considering. We have another work session on the 26th. And then we have one more legislative session at the beginning of November on November 2nd. November 9th, I think we would normally have a work session, but we are potentially going to be having just budget meetings that week. That was the night that we said instead of doing a traditional work session, that we would talk about stuff like this, we would just continue our budget meetings because we have to kind of get them in during that week. So then we have a legislative session on the 16th, at which time is that soon enough for us to say
Well, I'm gonna let Peter answer.
conventional
Yeah.
versus roundabout?
That's November 19th,
November 16th.
16th.
It's a week before Thanksgiving.
So you're asking if I'm told that day, can I get something done by spring?
Well, no, I think you want to do bid documents over the
Well,
winter.
can we put bid documents out in the late winter, early spring that would allow for construction commencement in the summer?
Yes.
Okay. But we don't want to wait till after Thanksgiving.
I'd rather not.
Okay, no,
Yeah, 'cause if you get into the holiday
I
and
want
then-
it to be done properly, so, I mean, that gives us 2 legislative sessions, and it gives us, 1 work session if we needed to come back and review things, and we can always go into a work session.
What we will also do so the public can be engaged
Yeah, I was gonna
on social
ask
media
about that.
is we will get the PowerPoint presentation and we'll put it on. I'll coordinate that with Peter and Ron later. We'll get the PowerPoint presentation on our webpage. Everybody knows it's on YouTube. That's where our meeting is if they want to see it live with the engineer presenting it. But we'll also get the actual PowerPoint so they can review it and take their time to look through it. And email and even phone call if they catch me at my desk. I'll very happily have conversations offline with people who have questions about options.
Yeah, is there any way we can, have the actual simulations available for the public to?
Well,
Yeah,
you had
the
you had
videos.
them as a
They're MOV.
Yeah, it's a
they're
flash
MOV
drive, right?
files,
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be a problem.
We
I
could
mean,
do
I
that
like,
too,
I
yeah.
like
I thought
people
that was
to
the
be
whole
able to-
idea.
Yeah.
I would want people to be able to compare, those files.
Let everybody get motion sickness watching the,
There you go.
7.5
Around and round.
minutes each.
Last quick question. Construction frame on either of those 2 scenarios, what do you think?
Probably no more than 3 months.
Okay.
We're gonna have to write that into the contract document. We do not want to do this in
In
the
the-
The
the
rough
winter.
estimate.
yeah.
we're trying to do it in the summertime.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
there's going to be, I can tell you, particularly on the conventional intersection, there's going to be lead time on the mast arms and the signals and all the support material for that construction. So you would have to bid it as early as possible so they have time to order and get this stuff.
Yeah, particularly if it's special.
Yeah, if we get specialty stuff, because we did commit and we look forward to engaging HPC, and if that's the way it goes, and well, even with the roundabout, they're going to have their druthers, and we want to make sure that stuff is on a timeline, so when it goes out to bid, we follow the schedule.
So,
Right.
thank you very
Thank you.
much. Appreciate it. We have
See you
2
again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ron, as well.
I'm going to walk out with the consultant. Before I do that, I'll turn the next agenda item over to Lori Lee and Lynn to talk about an awning permit for First Village Coffee.
Great. Lynn, join us, please.
Great. I see the planner has arrived. We have an application, and I have the file. Lynn, would you like to present this and give the background on the HPC? This is an awning application, and the board usually approves these. It could be put on for resolution next week.
So this is an awning application that's actually in the Village Center District in the Historic District downtown at 123 Main Street. It's open now actually as the Village Cafe or the Village Coffee.
First Village Coffee.
That's it. Thank you very much for correcting. I was just gonna
Bam.
check the name.
You remember 123.
They actually presented informally to the HPC on Monday night, September 12th, and the HPC offered only a couple of minor recommendations, which they
Certifying the.
Yeah, in my conversations with the chair and the secretary of the HPC, there was no opposition on the board, and everyone was in favor. So there was no real comments. They gave them 2 comments, and the applicant
Forum
agreed.
issue.
Yeah.
They
Correct.
were-
And
That was really the.
And they have a requirement of 7-day notice prior to holding a public hearing. And since this is considered a determination by the board, a formal determination by the HPC, they need to take that decision after this public hearing, and they can't convene the public hearing without a quorum. So you could say that your approval is conditioned upon their successful completion of the public hearing and a
Good.
certificate of,
So let's put that on the agenda
Great.
for next week.
and put
Thank
it
you.
on for next week.
Excellent. Happy to be
Awesome.
moving forward.
So
Hope
we're
that the
good?
HPC is able to connect soon.
The last item on the agenda is the requisite deliberation on your introductory local law number 7. This is the change, the comprehensive change to your solid waste provisions. Their chapter on solid waste. We did take a line-by-line look at this at your last work session prior to putting on for public hearing. The public hearing was opened and closed without public comment. And if you are inclined to proceed based upon your deliberation this evening, we can put it on for formal adoption next week.
I thought the only thing we were waiting for was tickets.
We would need lead time on that, but we can make the law effective, and as soon as the forms of the tickets for code enforcement have arrived and are approved and arrived, then we can start the enforcement. But there would be no benefit to awaiting a formal adoption. It's going to take a couple of weeks for Secretary of State to come back. So we actually may be lucky in that the timing will coincide. But you should discuss amongst yourselves any deliberation.
Nothing's changed since we discussed it line by line last month, right?
No, the changes that you had suggested, that being the conformance of the definitions with the zoning code, all of that was done in the copy that was provided to you in advance of the public hearing and upon which you conducted the public hearing.
Okay, anybody need to update anything from our, okay, good.
No.
Then we've deliberated, and we'll
Okay.
vote on it next week.
And just a reminder, this will be local law number 8, because as you know, you passed the quality of life one, which is 8. We passed it as 7, so
Thank
great.
you.
we'll
All
get
right.
it done.
With that, do we have anything more we need to wrap up?
I'd like to introduce one topic under continuing business, if I may, and we can discuss it, and I'll start to talk about it. But if you don't want to pursue it, I will ask you at another time. May I?
Well,
We'll have to trust
I
your
would-
judgment. You didn't. Wait, how do we know? Are you? What
That's
kind of bombshell is
osmosis.
this?
It's not a
like, what are we-
bombshell.
What are we talking about?
I'm just trying to be formal. I'll be
Is
less
this the reason
formal.
why Tom's in the room?
Yes,
Okay.
it is. As you know, I've been meeting with the various department heads, running through their preliminary submittals of the budget, and we met with Miss Mary Ann Roberts today in the clerk's office, and we were going over potential new ways to generate revenue. And I think a couple times in my tenure here, I've seen the board approach since 2010 to consider increasing fees for either overnight parking on the street, overnight parking in the lots, or train station parking. Now, what we talked about today, just conceptually, is you really, the fees for parking on the street outside your house or parking in a lot outside your house, you do want to kind of keep that affordable for the residents. But there is a consideration that I'd like to present for revenue generation in increasing parking fees at the train station for commuters, both residential and non-residential. From Mary Ann's account, I think 2010 was the last time they increased those fees, and 2015 was,
Last year, then.
I'm sorry, 2015, but it was increased by only $25. But prior to that, you have to go back to 2011. So just so you can get your arms around what we talked about today, the annual rate to park last year at the train station was $425 for a resident. It was $550 for a town of Austin resident, and a non-resident was $1,050. We did some quick comparables to other municipalities, and and I'm going to ask Tom to help me out here from his memory. Scarborough train station, you have that here too? Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, I'm just curious, generally we talk about this in the budget meetings. I'm
Yeah,
just
why is
curious
this
why
being
we're
done
bringing
now?
this up right now.
Well, because I was going to wait till the budget meeting, but Mary Ann Roberts needed it to do her advertisement and production of the permitting in early November.
Oh, I see.
So I wanted to
That makes sense.
try to bring it up tonight.
All right.
But we can wait, and it's something that we can
Well,
talk
I mean,
about during the
you
budget.
don't- Well, that, you know, I mean,
That
We're
seems
looking
like a
at-
bad
we're-
sequence of
we're-
timing.
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, well,
I mean, so when does she need to know?
she said the first week in November today.
Well, then Marion Roberts should have approached us about increasing revenues 2 months ago. This is not a way to talk about a huge part of our population that pays on the average $5,000 to commute into Manhattan to have a job. It's not a minor deal. That's what it costs to commute, because Metro North keeps raising their monthly fares. It's the cost of parking, the ticket, the subway you generally take. It costs to the average person in Austining, and, you know, we don't have a couple hundred millionaires like Briarcliff does. We don't have, I mean, you know, they're working hard. I want to think about it. I don't want to be pushed into making these decisions and discussions like this because of a
If you could,
deadline in 2 weeks.
it sounds like there was some comparables done. And I know we've reviewed this in the past, obviously, when we raised it $25 last year, that was with having done some review. If you could email us, what are the other municipalities? If we're way out of whack, then let's maybe make a change so we're more comparable to other municipalities. If we're already, you know, a little high, then I can see that maybe we want to
I
slow
will.
down.
I will
So
I will summarize it, and I will show you the difference. I could tell you just for conversation and introduction into the email, which you will receive. I'll try to put it together before end of business tomorrow. We are lower compared to Scarborough and Croton, which were the two closest train stations that could possibly be used by our residents as well. Significantly lower to between $200 and $400 lower for residential, and same thing for outside residents. So the increase I will show you in the email wasn't, and I realize it's all significant, but in the scheme of things, because of the level of increases that has taken place in the last 6 or 7 years, has not been significant. And I was proposing either a $50 or $100 increase to each permit for an annual increase of $50 to $100 per permit to generate approximately $40,000 or $80,000 additional revenue.
Okay. That's compelling. It'll be interesting to see the numbers, and it would be helpful if we could really look at them. So can we revisit this, perhaps as continuing business in next week's meeting?
I will.
Oh,
I'll
you
also
won't be
get-
here, but Mary Ann will.
Yeah, and I'll get a little bit more into the details of what necessitated the November 1st.
She mails
answer.
the stuff out.
Yeah,
I get that.
yeah, but if it could,
Do that twice, so.
yeah. So, but if we could possibly
Yeah.
delay that to some, I'll see what her actual limit is on when she can mail
I
it
think
out.
it's a calendar year permit, so I understand them.
Yeah.
First thing.
It
Okay.
And we're gonna get, with the analysis, the village, it's a village, a town, and then outside of both of those, right? So we'll get that
Non-resident,
breakdown.
yeah.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, I'd love to see the trend to see whether more people use it because we're cheaper. That would be interesting.
Yeah, what is the breakdown of how many of our permits are
She
given?
she
Each of
left
those?
she left the meeting today. She was going to give me
Okay.
all of
That's
the
good.
overnight parking permits
Okay.
and how many she does every year, and the turnover of those as well, and also the breakdown of percentages of resident, town, and non-resident
Okay,
purchasers.
You're talking about the off-street overnight parking,
Yeah.
correct?
but as far as the train,
train.
because the only
Yeah.
decision we have to make in the next, that we're being
Train.
asked to make is with
for
the
the
train.
train.
So those are the
Yeah.
breakdown.
she has to
I'd like
get that
know how
out,
many of her
yeah.
permits are in each of those categories.
Yeah, I wasn't going to introduce tonight
Okay.
or this year overnight parking
Okay,
for residents.
all right.
And the rest of your revenue ideas, like the filming crews and all that stuff, that's all in your budget discussion, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's no, yeah, there's no other time sensitivity. It's just budget
No.
sensitivity.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
No, that's it.
Okay. Then with that, we will say thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you next week, October 19th. We'll back to our usual day and time. We'll be at the Birdsall-Fagan Police Court Facility for a legislative session. And we are going to need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thank you very much. Looking forward to seeing you next week. This meeting is adjourned. To advice of counsel, quick one.